Welcome to Coffee for Scalers, another episode. And today we're going to talk all about how to grow a sales team. And I have Pat Williams on my call today. So, hi, Pat. How are you?
Hey, Dennis. Thanks for having me. I'm doing great.
Yeah, great. And Pat is someone that I've known for many years now, who knows a ton about selling. And he has a great book as well, which I'm sure he's going to tell us about, which we'll talk a bit about some of the findings in that today. And yeah, Pat, it'd be great if you could tell the audience a little bit about your background, maybe to kick off.
Sure. Yeah. I'm I guess, six-time CRO for both private equity and venture capital-backed companies. And now I'm probably more in the world of business advising and an investor. And during my tenure when I was a CRO, I was primarily working for companies in SaaS, whether it was applications or data and analytics, did some stuff in marketplaces, and then recently some stuff with e-commerce and fulfillment automation. And during that time, I guess the expertise that I started to develop was, founder-led, B2B tech startups would come to me when they wanted to create predictable customer and revenue growth in order to scale their company to have a successful liquidity event. And
Nice.
so during that time, I was able to, or I needed to develop, some things like, how do you devise a go-to-market sales execution plan that could produce repeatable success, regardless of the stage of the company or the industry that it was in or the business model that it was going to be in. And then in order to execute those, you had to be able to build, high performance teams and leaders. And then I guess the other area that because I was dealing with these startups and they were kind of exiting the product market fit stage of their development. And so I started to, become, I'll say, have some expertise in transforming these, sales, marketing, customer success teams from being more product-centric approach to more of a business value consultative type approach. And fortunately, we saw, kind of growth rates across probably the last 7 companies, growth rates in the 45 to 80% compound annual growth. And fortunately, 5 of those 7 companies, we had successful liquidity events or exits. So that's a little bit about my background.
Wow, it's impressive. And did you typically kind of run the sales organization or more in those companies?
Yeah, that's in the last, I'll say these last 7 that I was just referring to, I was either the CRO or I was advising the CEO and the CRO in particular on the last ones. So that was the capacity I was in. And the CRO in these companies I was in charge of sales and customer success, which included account management. Yep. And I'll call it the demand side and professional services and things like that.
So, oh, great. Yeah. And for background for the audience as well, Pat and I worked together previously at Tubular Labs. So I was reporting into Pat where he was a CRO and he taught me a lot about selling. And we're looking forward to sharing some of this knowledge today. And I guess what you said earlier about like getting into a product-led organization, and you're really bringing in a go-to-market organization. What do you think is kind of key initially with that journey that you're trying to bring an organization on?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you bring that up because that was the whole premise of why I wrote the book, right? From Hustle to Scale, right? And it's this idea of that I happen to have failed in the first 4 startups that I was a part of, right? And so I was like, there's got to be something that I need to learn here that I'm not, because I see other people being successful at doing this, right?
Yeah.
And so, and what I learned there was a couple of things I learned, but one of the primary things I learned was that the best product rarely wins in the B2B technology space, right? And so what was it that, kind of took these companies that were being successful over the hump? Because as 1 out of 10 startups basically make it in the B2B technology world. So And what I learned, and I kind of call it the formula for success, but it's this idea of, you know, you gotta understand a couple of things, right? First of all, you need to have a clearly defined business problem, or I'll call it outcome, that you enable, that you can describe or convey in the customer's language, not yours. They don't care about your product, right? So, and then the second thing is that you really have to understand, who is it that you solve this for? Who cares about this, right? And a lot of people call this your ICP or whatever it happens to be. And then once you've kind of figured out what that looks like, you really have to be nails on this idea of how important is that to them, and what are the consequences of them doing something about it or not? Because or not is usually the alternative that a lot of people default for, which is do nothing. And so if you can crack the code on that and then easily distinguish how your company uniquely solves for that problem or outcome, and then align your company around this idea that I call, the cultural norms of your customer focused, sales and marketing driven, and organizationally enabled. Those are the things that I learned that you really need to understand in order to, and put together a go-to-market plan that can go ahead and execute against those things. So that's kind of a little bit of what I learned after, many years of not doing as well as what the recent results have been.
Nice. Yeah, because I remember when you came into our business, we were our growth wasn't as high as we wanted, and then it flipped back up over like a year and a half, 2 years, which was great to see. And I think one thing that you really that's great, like that I guess navigation system or roadmap to what you need to do. But one thing I remember you really taught me, actually, and I think the wider team, was like to qualify stuff out that's not good, and to be comfortable with that. What advice would you have for whether it's sales people who haven't learned that yet?
So a lot of times when I'm talking to potential sales candidates or sales leaders and the like, it's the one thing that's the great equalizer for all of us in the world is time, right? And so something that I learned from a mentor early on is that how you spend your time, whether it's on things that you have a high probability of being successful at or not, as the case may be, is what's going to determine your success, right? And so what I tried to do, and when we implemented a methodology at Tubular Labs, and I've done this at other companies as well, which is, what are you going to do to put yourself in the best position or the most favorable position that you pretty much it's going to be a no-brainer that you're going to win, right? And what are you going to do to say to yourself, this is not an opportunity that we're going to be able to win, right? Because if you're sitting there chasing opportunities that you aren't going to win, and a lot of times that happens because you have what I call the scarcity mentality. If you don't have enough pipeline or whatever it happens to be, you're just chasing anything so that you can have activity. But that actually will probably hurt you more than it helps you, right? So this idea of, go after the opportunities that you have the highest probability of winning, because let's just say, for example, and this was how it was kind of resonated with me, which is, if you have $1 million quota, let's just say, right? And there are 2,080 hours in a year that you have to go ahead and accomplish that quota. Every hour that you're not somehow progressing towards that is costing you about $5,000 an hour. So if you kind of let that sink in, that's what I mean about how do you prioritize your time and when you're qualifying. And one of the most important things in your overall sales process is this ability to qualify. Because if you don't do that, then you're not everybody thinks, oh, well, closing is the most important thing. Actually, it's not, because you're not going to have the opportunity to close unless you actually qualify whether you are, first of all, do you solve their problem? Second, do you do it in some unique way that nobody else can do it? And then third, is this a problem that is really, really important that they do something about, right? Why do it now? So that's a little bit of the background on kind of what I was trying to teach everybody with respect to, how do you make sure you're qualifying stuff out just as much as you're qualifying things in.
Yeah. I remember, Pat, you told me a great question one time to ask people in interviews around qualifying. And could you tell the audience about that question you ask sometimes to
Yeah,
understand the seller's mindset, I guess it is.
sure. Yeah. So if you're a sales leader and you're trying to figure out, if the seller that you're interviewing and, if they have I call it the capability to do a good job of qualifying. And that is, I used to ask people the question and say, hey, here's a basic sales process. There's 5 steps, and this isn't all encompassing, but it's just kind of the fundamental elements of a sales process or a buying process. And it would be, the first is, this idea of, prospecting or discovering that. Second step is qualifying. Third is, presenting your case of your solution, whatever it happens to be. Fourth is, trying to negotiate the deal. And then fifth is closing, right? So if I was to ask you, Mr. or Mrs., sales candidate, which is the most important step, knowing that they're all important and you can't get rid of any of them, but what would you say is the most important step in that process and why? So I would ask them that question, and then they would go ahead and rank them, right? And from 1 to 5. And then about, I don't know, 4 or 5 questions later, I would ask them this question to verify that that's what they really believed. If they said it was closing, then great. I would say, okay, great. This is how you rank them. This is why. Then I would say to them, so in general, in your career, when you lose, because we all lose deals, right? But when you lose, why was it that you lost? And, sometimes you would say, well, it was because of pricing or whatever. And I said, yeah, but in general, usually that's not why you lose. No, they go, I either didn't get the right person or I didn't understand their, issue more. And I said, oh, so qualifying? Yeah. And so that's how I verified whether what they told me in the ranking of the 1 through 5 versus what they actually believe was the reason why. And so that's the question that I would ask people. And that's how I would verify, is that what they really believe or not? And it's very enlightening when you're speaking to the candidate, but it's a way to, kind of make sure that you're right. In fact, qualifying them, that they actually understand that concept.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I found with some people that I hired as well, who were like, I guess, younger sellers, I guess I would say. So people earlier in their career, maybe 5-10 years into their career at this stage, some of them are really into like sales methodologies and stuff. And some of them can like really ream off like a good answer for that. But it's cool because they really think about it, sales as a discipline and stuff. And some of the, I find it amazing how, I guess, through the generations, maybe in the past is like, oh, someone's got the gift of the gab or whatever, where some people are really now like, what's the science behind it and stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it's a really important thing for people to understand that. I mean, we're still humans, right? And there's an anthropological cadence that we have as humans interacting, and so that's why and when I'm talking about the qualifying stuff, it's really about just kind of questioning, okay, well, what is it that you're trying to accomplish, and how was it done before, and just simple things like that. But if you don't understand that, and all you're doing is kind of trying to shepherd them through a sales process or whatever it happens to be, right? And okay, it's really important to me, so hopefully it's really important to you, and we're going to keep going. I'm going to keep telling you about what we're going to do for you, and then you miss the point, right? Because people don't want to be sold to anymore, Dennis, as you know.
Yeah,
right? People want to enroll. They want to know that you can help them, and that only you are the one that's going to get them to the successful outcome that they're hoping.
Yeah.
They don't really care what all the other stuff is about your product or anything else. It's like, is this a pain for me? And is it something that I need to get fixed? Otherwise, it's going to cause a lot more, heartache for my company or my organization or whatever it happens to be. And then do I think you can do, are you the one that I think can help me to do that?
That's great. Cool. And on that point, well, like talking about sales talent, like someone said to me one time, I was trying to like have a good structure in an organization as a CRO. And the person who gave me great advice at the time was like, I don't care about the structure. Do you have the right people or not in those roles to like help the business? So hiring is incredibly important, getting the right bums on seats. Like,
Yes.
what advice would you have out there for people when it comes to hiring great sales talent? So this is
Great.
more sales leaders, sales
Yeah.
managers. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So really, how do you get A talent, A level talent, that sort of thing?
Yes.
And I would tell you, yeah, I do, because it is something that, as I learned in my early days in doing startups, it's like, it comes home to you really, when you kind of sit down and think about it. It's like, if you don't have the right talent, you're in trouble. I mean, it doesn't matter how good or how smart or how great and wonderful your product is. If you don't have the right people in there helping you to execute against the, plan and stuff like that, it's not going to work. But so I would tell you a couple of things. First of all, you need to have a plan. I used to tell you guys all the time at Tubular, like, always be recruiting, right? But have a plan for
Some of the best advice
recruiting.
I've ever had.
Yeah, it's like, but have a plan, right? So whether it's the recruiting, whether it's the how do you evaluate your talent, if it's the right person, what does the hiring process look like? And some of the components of that you need to think about is, like, first of all, make sure you create a product description about what's the role, what are the responsibilities, right? What are they accountable for? And really be almost overly communicative on this so that you're setting expectations, right?
Mm.
And then another thing that you need to be putting some time into, and so that you can do the evaluation part of this, is what is the ideal candidate profile look like, right? And what goes into an ideal candidate profile isn't just like, oh, they need to be from this industry or something like that. No. You really need to kind of think through, it's like, what knowledge do they need to have, right? What are the skills that are required for them to be successful? What are the traits or values that they should possess? And then what is the experience, if it's industry related or whatever it happens to be? And the reason why you put those two documents together is because you need to align that with whatever you, Mr. CRO or Mrs. CRO, are going to use for your go-to-market and sales strategy. Because if you don't have those two aligned, if you've got a bunch of people that you're hiring that were really good at product selling, when it's not aligned with your value, you're going to kill yourself, right? You're not going to have the right people in the right place, right? And so part of that whole process of having a plan is you need to also make sure that you have a good list of interview questions that will surface whether these people possess those characteristics or traits or capabilities or whatever it happens to be, right? And then in your process, you want to make sure that you assign those to the people on your team that you're going to help you, in terms of the interview process, right? And then ask them to focus on specific capabilities or traits or whatever it is, as opposed to everybody asking the same questions to the same candidate, and then you really don't learn anything, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
And then you may also, especially in the cultural aspect, you may want to go out and get a tool that see if you got a good cultural fit. Sometimes there's some really good tools out there that you can use. And then I guess the last piece of advice I would tell people is hire what I refer to as a business athlete, and know what that is for your organization. Because if you do that, you're definitely putting the probability of a successful hire in your favor, right? And because we're all going to miss on hires and things like that. But what you're trying to do, and this is what I learned early on, it's like, you got to figure out how do you make sure that you kind of hit on, 60, 70% of them as opposed to 50, 40%, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Anyway,
and
there you go.
And well, I'll come back to that business athlete thing in a piece.
Yeah.
You said a minute ago there's some tools out there for like the culture stuff. How do you mean by that?
Yeah, you can. I think they're behavioral tests and stuff like that. I'm trying to remember the name of one that I was using, and but I think it was called Quantum or something like that. But basically, what it is it's like a behavioral test, and they ask these really interesting questions that are like, would you rather poison the sewer water in the city, or would you rather go out and, grow poppy seeds and somehow, infect the, whatever.
Yeah.
Right? But these odd things, but what it does, and they do it over a number, massive amounts of sample data of people, but it starts to tell you a little bit about the behavioral characteristics of the person, meaning so when you're interviewing, what they told you versus what you actually could expect from them if they decided what are their values and their norms as it relates to their profession, right?
Yeah.
It's a little bit like what I used, that question that I just told you about, the sales process, and then whether that person really believes what they told me. kind of like
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
but it's a little more sophisticated.
But those questions you'd actually bring into the interview, or you'd send them a link
Or
to do something.
you'd send them a
Yeah.
link to go ahead
Okay.
and have the
Okay.
interview.
That's
Yeah,
cool. Yeah,
yeah.
sounds good. And oh, you said about like getting different leaders or different people in your organization
Yeah,
for finding out different elements that you want to
yeah,
tap into.
yeah.
Like, do you have an opinion on like, or do you have kind of a favorite of like, you get an interview panel of 4 or 5 people, and then do they do individual interviews or group interviews, or what do you feel works best?
I think it's better if you actually have them interview them one-on-one as opposed to kind of doing a group thing when it comes to, I would say, when you're trying to assess a little bit about their traits that they possess, or characteristics
Yeah.
about them and things like that, or knowledge and how they
Yeah.
gain it and stuff like that, I would say that's better in a one-on-one type of thing. If you
Yeah.
want to do something I'll call it about their experience and stuff like that, or maybe some of I call it the how or their skills,
Yeah.
like how did they do something? That can be in a group type of setting, because
Yeah.
that's probably more
Yeah.
realistic,
Like
like
an
doing a
exercise.
simulated sales call or whatever it happens
Yeah.
to be. So
Yeah.
that's how I would align that. But I think my point is that just make sure that, when you do have other people, whether it's a
Yeah.
group or it's an individual, interviewing them as part of your plan, make sure you direct them what you want them to try to understand or assess about the candidate. And make
Yeah.
sure it's not the same thing that you just did with, this other person or your other group that they just interviewed.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah. I think actually that project based thing is something I learned after hiring 1 or 2 bad people. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
it's a must. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really
Okay.
is.
Cool. And what was I going to say? Oh yeah, just on the business athletes. So what are the characteristics? Because I think you have them clearly defined, right? I'm not
Yes,
sure
I
if they're in
do.
the book or not, but it'd be great to
They,
hear. Are they in the book?
they are in the book, and yeah, I do have them clearly
What's
defined. I
the
can
scale?
just rattle them off here for you. But
Yeah.
so what a business athlete, or one of the traits or characteristics of a business athlete is, first of all, they have really, really strong business acumen, right? So they understand business, whether it's operations, finance, strategy, things like that, right? They have what I call a results-oriented mindset, meaning this ability to, set and put the goals and put together a plan and then be able to relentlessly kind of, adjust and optimize to be able to hit those things. They are what I call leaders, whether it's formal or informal. And what I mean by that is that they, I'll call it strong communication with their team, whether it's around the roles, responsibilities, the expectations, and putting, if you're a seller, putting everybody in the best position to be successful, so to speak, versus if you're a sales manager. And I'll talk a little bit about the differences between a business athlete as a leader versus a individual, but these are just the fundamental things. They have really good, what I call interpersonal effectiveness, which is the ability to communicate both internally and externally, good listening skills and empathies. And they can, because they have that effectiveness, right? They can build I'll call it a foundation of trust, whether it's with team members or it's colleagues or it's, other professionals that they're working with. They have strategic insight, which is this ability to assess, understand, and action strategy. And they have adaptability to change. And that's especially important in startups, as you know. There's 2 additional traits that I think go along with managers or team leaders or executives or whatever you have. And that's the first one is this idea of the ability to recruit, evaluate, hire, and develop talent. And the second one is this idea of you can build I call team leadership, but building high performance teams. So that's the traits or characteristics of what I call a business athlete and what you should be interviewing these folks for that you're bringing into your selling organization, or if you're bringing in sales leaders, sales managers, etc.
Yeah, because with the sales leader piece, you then, when you hire these people, how you judge them and keep them accountable is on that hiring, retaining, and the leadership. Is there anything else that, well, obviously the numbers, anything else?
No, I mean, I think it's so there's a something I heard, and it was a good way to encapsulate the difference between being a manager and being a leader, right? So your title is what makes you a manager, but your people are what make you a leader. They're the ones who vote on that. And I think that, in addition to, are you hitting your numbers and are you hitting your objectives and stuff like that, at least in these business athlete traits, right?
Mm.
What is it that you're doing in terms of, how good are you at knowing that you're only as good as the people that you bring in there, and hopefully they're better and smarter, than you are.
Yeah.
And then how are you then how are you taking a team a team of all-stars and making them an all-star team? And you
Yeah.
understand the distinction, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I look for when I'm, sitting there saying, do I
Yeah.
think this person has got the ability to go out there and, enable, empower, and execute with their team?
Yeah. And actually just thinking about the best individual salespeople you've ever seen, what is it about them that you think is different than others who are not as good?
Well, they are truly a business athlete, first of all, but based on the criteria that we just talked about, right? That's one of the things. The other thing that I think that distinguishes them is that they're insanely curious. They really genuinely want to help people, right? They believe that their stuff really does help people, as opposed to, I'm just trying to make a sale, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
The other thing is that they really understand this idea of a buying journey and a buying process and the motivation or inspiration behind it on behalf of the customer, right? I call them, they're really good at solving for the customer as opposed to solving for, something else, my product or whatever it happens to be. I think those are things that the really good ones, that they're also very, like I talked about, this results-oriented mindset. That's a huge one for me.
Yeah.
Why I think the people that do really well on that. The other thing that I found was interesting, Dennis, was over the time that I've been doing this, is that if they have somebody that's been in a selling type of role or marketing role or something like that, meaning like a parent or somebody that's an influencer over there, a family member, whatever it is, that's another thing that I saw that was kind of like a indicator of success for these folks. So, yeah.
It was interesting what you said there earlier as well. Yeah, it's like you're like, you have a perfect blueprint and you're just kind of reiterating some of the things I'm thinking naturally. But I think what you said earlier about like that they really believe that this solution can help them and they're passionate about it. I guess that's where a company can do a great job with its sales talent as well, of like getting those stories of customers into the organization and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, people do things for their reasons, right? We talked about this many, many times. It's like, people buy emotionally and justify logically, right? That still happens today. We're still humans, we got all this wonderful technology and we got AI and all this other good stuff, but we're still humans and people do things emotionally, right? So if you don't have that kind of in your value system, that you want to help somebody and that you're trying to, better their circumstance because they have this problem that they've told you is really a big issue for them and they need to do something about it. Otherwise the consequences are not so great. That to me means that, because that gives you, number one, it gives you patience, right? You're not trying to just make the sale. You're trying to help them to be successful. And that comes from a place of genuine, authenticity in that, as opposed to, I'm just trying to sell you something.
Yeah. Great. So, okay. So now everyone knows what to do when it comes to hiring. We're not going to touch on firing today, but hiring is covered. Yeah. So, but let's talk about what really resonated to me in your book, From Hustle to Scale, as well. Here you go. You can buy it on Amazon, anywhere. We'll put links in the description. What really resonated with me as well in your book was as a sales leader, and you're developing the strategy of like how you go to market and approaches for targeting and winning a market. So this was in the book. You talked about approaches for targeting and winning a market and like segmenting it. Yeah. Could you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah. So there's fundamentally, what in my experience, there's kind of like three ways, especially when you're a startup, of approaching or targeting to win a market. So the first one is what they call head-to-head, right? That's where you're trying to go beat the established leader in a category that already exists, right? And you think that your solution is like, 8 to 10 times more valuable Otherwise, you're really probably you won't move the needle for anybody if you're just kind of incrementally better. So that's kind of the first approach, right? The second approach is what is called big fish, smaller pond. And so here, the category also exists, but instead of trying to take on the leader or beat the leader, what you're really doing is you're targeting to win a well-defined subsegment of the category. So an example of this would be that people might resonate with is like Workday is a company that started out, and what they originally went after was cloud HR. And then expanded into financials, ERP, and things like that. Or there's a company called ServiceNow people might be familiar with, which is they started out in ITSM, which is IT service management, and then they expanded into platform as a service for various business process, whether it was risk management or compliance or whatever it happens to be, right? So that's an example of this big fish, smaller pond, and doing that, subsegment of a category. The last one is what I call category curation. And this is where you're targeting and positioning yourself to win a category that you are creating. So let me give you an example of that, which is Amazon Web Services, right? They used to be called EC3, and they created I call it infrastructure as a service category, right? So previously, all these software as a service companies or cloud-based companies used to have to build out their own, multi-tenant, 3-tier infrastructure, whether it's the computing, the networking, and all that good stuff, right? They would do it for themselves. And so Amazon kind of said, nope, we're going to go ahead and just give it to you. All you got to do is come in and subscribe, and we'll have everything set up, and you just tell us how much you want in terms of your instances and, what apps you want to have on, blah, 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 right? And so that is what I mean by, you're going to create your own category and try to win. And so what I learned, though, from these 3 different categories or approaches or targeting and winning a market is that unless you have a significant amount of capital and resources behind you, especially as a startup, right? The approach that had the highest probability of success was the big fish, smaller pond. And the reasons why that is because for example, in category creation, right? You actually first have to prove that the category needs to exist. So that means lots of educating, which means lots of resources and money that you have to spend. And that means that in addition to doing that education, right? You're selling them on being a market problem first, then defining the parameters and positioning yourself against that. So that's a big, that's like trying to sell somebody that they have a problem first and then tell them why you can uniquely solve it. In the case of the head-to-head approach, right, you have to spend enormous amounts of time overcoming the inertia of when you have a category leader. Why should I or shouldn't I buy from you? Because it might be more risky, or the friction of change is way more higher to do that. It's not worth the trade-off, or the certainty of getting the value that you're claiming you're going to give them. So that's why, I learned that the, big fish, smaller pond is the one for tech startups, B2B tech startups is the one that you have the highest probability of succeeding.
Cool. But I guess that big fish, small pond is easier if your target addressable market is much bigger. It's much hard. Or what do you think?
Well, you need to know that. I mean, if you're going after this category that exists, but the subsegment has a sufficient TAM to be able to, hit your growth objectives and things like that. Yeah, that is true. You really need to be mindful. Do I have a big enough TAM in that segment of the category to get me to the stage I want to be? And then you can talk about how do you expand your TAM, just like we were thinking about it at Tubular. And that's what, whether it's the Workdays, it's the ServiceNows, it's the, whoever that have gone down that route, they go in it with kind of like, this is an established category. There is a big enough TAM, and then there is opportunities to have tangential markets that I can expand into.
Yeah. But Pat, what do you think of marketing as a lever to help a business grow sales revenues?
Yeah. So when I'm working with various customers, there's a tool that I use that is called the compass exercise. And what it does is it basically helps you understand whether marketing or sales kind of leads in the effort of, surfacing demand and then converting it into customers and that sort of thing. So if you go ahead and I'll bring up a slide of what this compass exercise thing looks like. And so let me pull that up. And so basically what you're doing is you're trying to figure out who is it that takes the lead in your organization? Who is it that takes the lead in getting the offering or your product to your customers? And so there's a set of criteria that you go ahead and evaluate yourself against, right? And what you're looking at here is the set of criteria that are part of your go-to-market that you sit there and make an assessment on as to whether it's going to be more, leaning towards marketing resources or more sales intensive and utilizing those resources, right? And so here's a list of those things. And what you do is you kind of score yourself against these on a grid or a graph. And if you go look in the book, it'll have it in there. But you score yourself against these, and what it will tell you, and the example that I use in the book is this idea of, are we talking about we're selling a product like toothpaste or something that's really, really sophisticated B2B, like jet engines, right?
Okay.
And what you'll be able to assess out of that is like, okay, well, which way is it lean? Obviously, toothpaste is more like the marketing intensive efforts, right? Because you really don't need a selling organization to convince people to buy toothpaste, right? For these reasons, right? It's inexpensive. The market size is massive, right? It's really simple in terms of I'll say, how much do you have to educate yourself to use this thing? Let's put it that way, right? And there's this term called fit and finish, which is, what's called like out of the box solutions, right? So what is it that you have to do other than open the box and unscrew the cap to actually use the thing and get benefit from it? So that's what I mean by fit and finish, right?
Yeah.
And then there's, what type of customer are you? Are you consumer versus a B2B, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what it looks like in terms of the criteria that you use. And then that will start to guide you in terms of your go-to-market and what is the, I'll say the relevance in the organization of having more sales related, capacity or resources or effort or whatever it happens to be versus marketing related, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And is it fair to say that like typically B2C is more marketing driven versus B2B sales?
Yeah, very much so, right? Because it's what you're trying to do there is it's like sales job is really to have the place or the environment for people to acquire your products or, that type of thing, right?
Yeah.
So think about like when you buy iPhones, right? It's like, you don't have somebody selling you an iPhone, right? But the sales organization at Apple Computer aligns all these different distribution mechanisms, whether it's through, an AT&T store or a Verizon store, whatever it happens to be, right? Or you can do it directly. Versus like in the case of a jet engine, right? Well, that's where marketing is really educating the customer on the things that you can do with it. But there's so many more aspects of acquiring that particular product that you have to have expertise in terms of a selling organization to help you to understand, what is necessary in terms of educating yourself and how to use it. And what is the fit and finish of the product? And, does it, is this something that, you're looking to do over a long term and evolve it into something of greater value to you as opposed to just brushing your teeth, et cetera.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's great. Cool. All right. Well, I was one last question, like any parting advice for sales leaders or sales individuals out there to wrap it up today?
Yeah. There's probably, I would say there's probably three things in my point of view, or at least this is what I learned in my experience, that will be the biggest factors in your success or not, the case may be, right, to achieve your aspirations as a sales leader. And the first one is, and we've hit on this quite a bit during our conversation, but you need to master the ability to recruit, evaluate, and hire top talent in order to create a high performing team. So that's number one. The second thing that I would tell people is that, get proficient at enabling, enrolling, and empowering these teams and individuals. And then the last thing I would say is that, make sure you have this capacity, and maybe it's a leadership capacity, capability, but of building a foundation of trust and make it about the team's success versus the individual, right? Because as we alluded to earlier, right? Your title makes you a manager, but your people are the ones that make you the leader. So that's why I would suggest those three things are probably the.
It's great advice.
If that's a tip, of how to be successful, you're going to be as a leader, you're only going to be as successful as your ability to create these, awesome performing teams and make it about the team.
Great. Thanks, Pat. This has
You're
been
welcome,
absolutely awesome. Yeah. I think lots of people are going to get a lot of value out of this, and get the book From Hustle to Scale by Pat Williams. So thanks, Pat. And
thank you, Dennis.
Goodbye,
Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to that episode of Coffee for Scalers with Pat and I. Good news, everyone. We've decided to launch a podcast that's a podcast that's solely focused on sales leadership and selling. So we got some positive feedback from this episode from some people that we know. And yeah, we are launching a new podcast, which will have a link in the description and a button here to go to Closing Time with Pat and Dennis. It's not a bar. It's where you go to learn sales leadership, how to become a CRO, everything to do with selling. And it's going to be on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Anything else to say, Pat?
I would just say, thank you, by the way, for the invite and for participating in this episode of Coffee for Scalers. It was an awesome experience. And thank you to those of you who have expressed interest in this new podcast of ours, Closing Time with Pat and Dennis. And for those of you who are wondering some of the things that are going to be contained in that new podcast, as Dennis related, it's about how do you become a strong CRO and building strong sales teams. And it's really, a lot of it is based on a book that I actually produced here, about a year ago or something like that. It was the name of the book, and here it is. It's called not Coffee for Scalers, but it's called From Hustle to Scale. And it really gets into the various aspects of, how do you be a CRO? How do you put together the right strategies? How do you make sure you got the right teams in place? All the things that are encompassed in being a CRO in a B2B tech company. So we hope you guys will listen. As Dennis said, look in the links below and or on the side if they're over here.
Yeah.
And we really look forward to having all of you in, or wherever we got these things set up. And we really look forward to having all of you be part of our audience and participate in the next podcast. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.